Thank you for having me. We're excited to break ground on Building 9, Riverwalk 9. In sum, it'll be 28 floors, so it'll be the tallest building of the Riverwalk. So when we initially designed Southtown, our 6 buildings west of Main Street were all going to be 16 stories, and then we're going to have a little more height on the east side so that they could look over the west buildings. And the 9th building was always going to be the tallest. I've jokingly been referring to it as Riverwalk Heights as the name, but that hasn't been blessed by the partnership yet, so that's just me going rogue. 28 stories, 357 units. The base of the building will be acquired by Sloan Kettering, much like the 7th building, Riverwalk Point is. So it's a very similar structure to Riverwalk Point. So 8 floors of Sloan Kettering housing, followed by 19 floors of market rate rentals, much like Riverwalk Point. But different than Riverwalk Point, 2 things. One is new office space for RIOC, 7,000 square feet on the ground level, and then stairs going down to a lower level, which also has windows. And we've been working with RIOC to design the spaces and to have a separate entrance, separate signage. It's basically a separate space. I would say a sweetheart rent, but that probably is not the right adjective to use at a formal meeting of RIOC. So just to say it's a below market rent, that was part of the negotiation. And it is going back a couple of years now. We negotiated the 9 buildings of Riverwalk in 1997, and there was renegotiating in 2000, and every so often there's a pivot, and we do a little trading. And so for 8 and 9, buildings 8 and 9, we did a negotiation that went to the board, that was approved, where we sort of had our game plan that in building 8 it was going to be an all affordable building. All 300 plus units were going to meet the affordability requirements, and that with all of those units in building 8, we would have met our 40% overall affordability requirement for all of Southtown, leaving us with building 9 to do as a market rate building. And so building 8 started pre-COVID. We got our TCOs during COVID. We leased it up during COVID and leased it up recently, and now we're moving on to building 9. So there's ground floor office space for RIOC, and then the other piece of the building 9 development will be finishing out the commons, what I refer to as the commons east. So in the same way that there's a commons between buildings 3 and 4, because that's where the subway runs. The subway doesn't stop at Main Street. The subway keeps on going into Queens. So we're not building between buildings 8 and 9, just the way we're not building between buildings 3 and 4. And so that's going to be a public space. That's the Commons East. That will be built by Hudson Related, turned over to RIOC to run and maintain and manage as RIOC currently manages the original Commons. So before I get to the pretty pictures, a few other issues of note. Before we even start construction, there are a few things we have to do. We are moving the location of the garbage collection for the retailers, which is basically right in the Building 9 footprint, in really at the direction of RIOC, because we gave them a few suggestions, but RIOC determined we're going to move that to sort of be a fenced area across the street from the subway entrance, sort of to the south of the MTA vent. You know, that's basically a Wild West parking lot, underutilized space. So we're going to enclose it, fence it, and have that be the location for the retailers to temporarily store their garbage before their carters come. Because as we know, the AVAC does not include commercial garbage. We are also doing a 2-phase process for the dog run. We are doing an interim step in Fireman's Field, flush with where our overhead protection is, to sort of minimize the amount of impact on the green space during construction, because as you know, there's a temporary dog run on the Building 9 footprint today. And then a new dog run will be incorporated into the Commons East, which I'll show you when we get to the plans. We're moving the crosswalk for where you can cross Main Street from east to west, so it doesn't interfere with where the construction's going to be, which won't include the sidewalk anymore. So there won't be a sidewalk outside of Building 9 in the Commons East, and we'll move the crosswalk. So basically, if you're walking up Fireman's Field, you could cross over. This is for the law-abiding pedestrians using a crosswalk. That will be further south from its current location. And lastly, we've had a lot of back and forth with RIOC about the amount of overhead protection and how it impacts Fireman's Field. Basically, there is some ambiguity about exactly how much this will be enforced by DOB, because there's the regulations and then there's what the inspectors demand of us when they come out to the site. And they can come out to the site and issue a stop work order and say they want X, Y, and Z done, and it doesn't matter what the regs are, you just have to sort of jump through those hoops. So for now, what we've agreed with RIOC is that we will maintain a 50 feet deep overhead protection.
I'm so sorry, David.
That's okay. Should I start from the beginning?
Yes, please.
You know, there is something concerning, obviously, from a safety perspective, that we don't want kids kicking soccer balls when we're going up with a building 28 stories high. I don't know exactly what the height is, but call it 300 feet. There is a part of the regulations that says that the Department of Buildings wants to see overhead protection, protecting pedestrians 1/2 the depth of the height of the building. So if the building's going up 300 feet, it would be basically a 45-degree angle to 150 feet of coverage. Now, the truth is that if you see any building going up in the city, high-rises, they're not providing overhead protection 50% of the way. You know, it could cross, 6th Avenue and go halfway down, the next street. That doesn't happen. Basically, the way DOB likes to see is to make sure that there's overhead protection of pedestrians on sidewalks, but the streets themselves are not protected. So there's a practical element to this. In this case, because we have a soccer field with kids playing, we want to be safe, and so we want to plan for the right safety plan that we feel comfortable with, knowing that it could become not exacerbated, but it could be a more robust amount of security protection, which would then encroach farther into Fireman's Field. So you may have seen a diagram where we were showing overhead protection at 150 feet, which is 50% of the height. But for now, we're going to put up 50 feet of sidewalk protection, because it is unclear. You don't really have the situation a lot in New York City where you have a park that's adjacent to a building going up. You don't have a lot of buildings going up parks. So we're going to be working obviously with RIOC to make sure, A, that is a safe location. And, I asked the construction team, I said, if your kids were playing in that soccer field, what do you think would be an appropriate distance for overhead protection? Because if a hammer flies off the building, it doesn't go straight down, it goes at a little bit of an arc. And so, we came to 50 feet as what we thought was a good safe approach. And if DOB requires us to have more, we will have more. And so, the truth is that between the overhead protection for Fireman's Field and the Fireman's Field work we're doing now that we're obligated to do from our last negotiation, which is adding outside lights, which is a construction project in and of itself, we thought, when we were planning to do it at the end of Building A, we thought, let's hold off, because since we're encroaching on Fireman's Field for Building 9 construction, let's not extend the amount of time we're disrupting the use of Fireman's Field. Let's try and minimize in an efficient way how much time we are disturbing Fireman's Field. And the hope is that when the vertical construction is complete from a concrete standpoint, and the brick is installed and the windows installed, and you basically have a tight facade, then you can take that down the overhead protection. So our interests are aligned to not want to use up Fireman's Field any more than we need to, and it's and we're going to rely on DOB to to give us ultimate guidance. So with that, so I brought 4 visuals with me. The first is sort of just sort of an isolated view of Building 9. The black stripe to the right is Main Street. So you see there is a driveway, it's part of the property tax lot that will serve only Building 9. And as you know, all of the Riverwalk buildings have these, sort of internal driveways or porte cocheres. And I was appreciating it just half an hour ago when I was driving down Main Street. I did a quick little tour of Riverwalk before coming back up here to 680, and there were three cars, all double parked on Main Street. A cab, a UPS, and a van. And so I thought I was sitting waiting in traffic until I realized they were all just pulled over. So one of the lessons we learned from Main Street is it's good to have a place to pull over. So you see the internal driveway, and it's sort of an L-shaped building, 28 stories up, and it looks in line with buildings 7 and 8 in terms of the mix of brick and metal and good sized windows. Next. And there is a view as if we were kayaking in the East River. So that's looking at the back, and in the foreground someday will be a bike lane that has been a part of our conversations with RIOC to make sure that we have left space in both Building 9 and the Commons East for a bike path along the East Promenade. Next. That is we're standing in the middle of Main Street with the tram behind us, looking at Building 9. So from this vantage point, you can see where the RIOC office spaces are. And you can see from the architecture that the RIOC space is sort of depicted distinctly, so you know what is office versus residential. So there will be an entrance to the public right there on Main Street. The residential entrance is sort of around the corner from there. So we wanted to separate the 2 spaces to give each lobby breathing room. And the RIOC space goes all the way down to towards the water, as well as a lower level. And of course, I just noticed this, the renderers only put fancy cars in renderings. Next. And that is the Commons East, so you can't really see it very well, and I can't see it very well, but I will narrate. That the top of the image is Main Street, and the bottom of the image is the promenade, and that those 2 semi-parallel lines you see at the bottom is where we have to move the Commons East west of, because that's going to be the bike lane. So basically, this is an old drawing of Commons East, and now we know where the bike lane is going to be. So everything's going to shift up a little bit. Or I guess it'll be slightly condensed so that there's room for the bike lane. But at the top, what you see is a sort of hexagon figure is a civic plaza with benches. Then if you're going down to the left, let me do it this way. So here we have civic plaza with benches. These are all walkways. And what is very tricky about the site is the topography slopes severely. So how to get from here to here, without needing a toboggan is, all of these. So there are some steps, and this is how we get there. So obviously there's also a handicap accessible route as well as steps. So this we call amphitheater steps. So you see here there's some seating areas so that there can be some kind of activity or performance here with seating and a quasi amphitheater. And the walkways sort of separate the activities. And here you have the new dog park with artificial mounds and some seating areas and a 2-gate entrance so the dogs don't run away. Here we have picnic tables with grill stations. And here's a little hammock area. So, there's a lot going on. I think it's going to be really wonderful, and people will take full advantage of the different spaces. I think that, and when I just take one, start with Faye, just you can take your time sort of looking at it and passing it on. I happen to be a fan of the Commons, which we built 20 plus years ago, but it was really sort of like one space and, not a lot going on other than passive recreation. And so here we have a little more active recreation in sort of different, discrete spaces. I think that's sums it up.
Okay, just in the interest of time, thank you very much for that presentation, David. I would like for Damon to give an overview of the financing in terms of what we have been working out, and there's still some things that need to be finalized, but the nuts and bolts of the negotiation and the deal, in my mind, it's always correct when I say this, pretty much worked out. So Damon, if you could just give an overview as to the financing.
And in your the memo to the board, there is also a summary, so you can follow along there. I'll try to hit the keynotes. There's a bunch of different revenue streams. First off, we have the construction period ground rent, which we will receive beginning when the lease is signed or initial financing is completed. And that's going to be $483,000 a year, and I'm giving you round numbers. Public safety fee will commence as of the rent commencement date, and that is $6,000 a year. Annual ground rent commences as of rent commencement date.
I think that's $6,000 per month.
Yeah, that is a mistake. Per month.
It's $20 per unit per month.
Yes. Annual ground rent is almost $1 million a year. Compounded annual increases of 3%. A specified rental payment of $24,799,838. That is due. It's a one-time lump sum payment, and it's due.
That's substantial.
Substantial completion.
90% TCOs.
Exactly, and it can be deferred within 18 months with a 4.5% interest rate. There's also mini temp, which starts upon lease signing. That is based on the square footage of the site, which is 268,600 square feet times $1 per square foot, gives you $268,600 per year. There's also the TEP payments. There is an abatement for the first 35 years. So that will start 35 years later. A transaction payment may also be due depending on the type of transaction. And then there's some other details about payment to the landlord, expenses, and payments in lieu of mortgage tax, which I won't go into too much detail.
Actually, there is a substantial payment due when Sloan Kettering makes its final payment to us.
Yes.
That's going to be, I think, like $2.5 million. It's a big number.
Mm-hmm. That is the basic outline of the proposal.
Yeah, so the reductions, as we mentioned before, this is in part a recognition of the deferral of time that was necessitated because we have the COVID pandemic, and so everything was on hiatus for a bit. And so we're restarting this process.
Yes.
And in order to facilitate, we recognize that the reason for the hiatus is on the
Yes, it was unavoidable.
Yeah.
And so this kind of mollifies the impact, and this is fair to all parties. We've been negotiating this, I hope successfully, and we'll all be very pleased. What is about 18 months construction, 24 months?
We're hoping 26 for the first TCO, and then a few months thereafter for the next one.
Okay.
So yes, Howard, as you stated, Shelton and myself, we approached the board individually, all the board members, earlier this summer. It made sense. I'll say Hudson Related has been a very good collaborative neighbor of ours, and you're here to stay with your 9th building about to be constructed. And you know, because of the pandemic, a lot of expenses were incurred for pandemic-related expenses. And it's not just RIOC, this was a statewide thing. A lot of businesses suffered because of these unexpected exorbitant expenses. And you know, in order to ensure that the building got built, this is the deal that we came up with, and it made good business sense, and the board agreed with that sentiment. And this is a way to ensure that we will, and I hate to put it bluntly, get our 24.7 million after the building is built. Shelton and Damon and Capital Planning and Projects has earmarked some of that money for some very exciting projects in the future that we will discuss with the board and at future REDAC meetings as it becomes relevant. But this was a way to ensure that we continue to operate and maintain business and also make good business deals for Roosevelt Island and the community.
I'll just add, just to piggyback on that too, one of the exhibits that's attached to the board memo, it's Exhibit 4, it's a resolution that was passed in 2018, and it's actually our authority to override zoning in order to construct these buildings. I can pass you a copy of it here. Yeah, it just, one of the attachments in here I came across when I was reviewing the board materials, but it's a basic term sheet for Southtown 8 and Southtown 9. And the numbers that Damon ran through, it's just a good succinct listing of the various payments and the various payment streams. And I think it also just shows the consistency. Those numbers haven't changed in the interim time. And this, like I said, was approved in 2018 by the board.
Right.
Right, so this builds on the existing agreement.
Exactly,
Right.
that's right. And we've been here are copies of the various documents that we're asking for approval for: the ground lease, the MSKI sublease, our office lease, a license agreement for all this related work with the crosswalk and whatnot.
Right.
But it's all pursuant to these previous agreements.
This in turn is a continuation of the original.
Correct.
That's right.
agreements.
That's
So a lot of the things that is being presented now are kind of a rehash of things that were being negotiated at the time. We tied a lot of the plans, contingency plans of Building 9 into Building 8. So the board has previously voted on several of these resolutions in terms of general speakings as to how the construct of Building 9 would come to be. That being said, what we're talking about now are some very specific nuances that we deem to be important for the board to consider as it comes to a vote, hopefully tomorrow, with regards to allowing Hudson Related to move forward with Building 9. That said, Gerald mentioned that there is a license agreement that is also in play. We felt it important, and Barbara can speak to some other of the legalese if need be. But this was contemplated by us collectively. Chris Rizzo, who is also a partner at Carter Ledger and a very close collaborator on this project for RIOC's interests. We thought that this was necessary given the magnitude and the fact that Firefighters Field would be partially used as a construction staging site. Prince, our new Director of Capital Planning and Projects, was very instrumental in coming up with the nuances with regards to those terms, or the four corners of that document. And I will give it to you to explain some of those nuances.
I'm sorry for Chris begins. Anything else for Damon before he leaves? Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Damon has to.
Yeah, about 10 more minutes, just want to make sure that we,
If there are any other questions, I'm sure Damon will be available tomorrow,
Yes.
and when the full board has convened, if there are any questions with regards to the finances, he can answer them then, since we will probably be doing this all over again.
Right.
in about
So it's, as
15
far as opinion,
hours.
we'll simply be highlighting the variances from the existing, agreement from 4 years ago, basically.
Okay.
The broad terms of that, to these specifics,
Okay.
both, for timing and for amount. And basically, the slots existed in the same way.
Sure.
And the amounts are, the variances are logical. So we can explain each instance of change.
Sure.
And to get to that point, I think when it was originally contemplated, it was like 268,000 square feet, and it ended up being 268,600 square feet, correct me if I'm wrong. But that's where the source of a lot of those numeric
The
variances.
approximate 300 units,
I didn't know, did the FAR number change?
No, I think in our papers it may have,
Oh,
so when some
yeah,
of the,
yeah,
so when some of those numbers were run, the variances are very.
Well, once the building is constructed, the numbers will be adjusted retroactively and prospectively to reflect the accurate square
Of
footage of
course.
the building. Payments that are made now, adjusted, once it's constructed.
Right.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Will firefighters bill the same footage afterwards, after the building is complete?
So that's what Chris is going to speak to now. Thank you, Damon, so
Thank
much
you
for
all.
making
Thank you.
yourself available for this meeting.
Okay, that's fine.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Prince Shaw, as I mentioned before, Director of Capital Planning. So one of the things that we started looking at right off the bat when we first discussed the construction of Building 9 is the location of the dog. We wanted to check, we obviously, the dog runs highly used. We want to make sure, and we had recently actually upgraded with the cedar mulch and, using some of the comments from the Roosevelt Island, the community, and using those comments, adding the shading structure and all of that. So we had used all of that. We had received a document from the Residents Association, and used that as the basis of doing the temporary upgrades to the existing dog run. So we know that the dog run is used, and we know it's heavily used, and there's a need for it to be relocated because of the construction of Building 9. So one of the things we first started looking at is where else can we put the dog run? And I know that there was a graphic sent out earlier in the year, I think it was about early summer, that relocating the dog run potentially at the existing kind of oil dock area. So that was kind of one of our ideas. What we did then is we had a study done to see what we can do with the area. The existing soil needs to be remediated. There's a whole remediation process because, as everyone knows, there was an oil dock there. We have to take out about 2 feet of soil. We have to cap it. We have to do a concrete capping on top of that. That process and the cost of that process does not basically did not make sense for a temporary dog run from a agency spending perspective and also location perspective. So then we looked at, okay, well, let's start and figure out what are the effects of the construction of Building 9. We knew that one of the effects was the control access zone. We know that potentially the control access zone can be as high as 150 feet because that is what the DOB requires on paper. So it's Chapter 33 DOB code that tells you construction processes for superstructure that says when you are in the superstructure of this building, you have to establish a control access zone of half the total height of the building. So we know that that is potentially a case. And we also know that, in New York City, because of how the proximities are handled, that may or may not be the case all the time. We also know that it could be the case, right? So, and all of that is based on the interpretation of the DOB inspector that comes to the site. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that we were locating the dog run on the field in a way that even if we go out to 150 feet, which is this, the white line that you see here, it would still not disrupt the temporary dog run location. This temporary dog run will have the same materials that you see on the other dog run. It'll have the cedar, the natural cedar mulch. It'll have the fencing. It'll have the shading like we have at the other dog run. It'll have the double gated entrances to protect the large dogs and the small dogs. Additionally, one of the things we looked at is, okay, well, if we rotate the dog run here, what is the impact of that on the field play? We know that from the beginning of when the construction will start, we will not be permitting the field, so but it will be free play. You know, you could go there and play. And the question has, come up, well, if it's free play, and I know the field is being used for softball, can I still play softball there? Does it actually work with the amount of distance I have between the dog run, from the home plate to the dog run and the other way? And there is, and that is why the dog run was located there. The other larger thing to remember here is also, as part of the Building 9 construction in the Commons, we are getting a permanent dog run. The third layer to this is the bike lane project. So, as you all know, we've been working on the bike lane project with federal grants. We have about $5 million in federal grant for the bike lane project. And then we are matching that also. It's a substantial project that is going to really beautify this whole ferry area. It will create a bike lane in the back and really connect our East Promenade as the larger goal of really connecting our island. That bike lane will require coordination with firefighters field. It will also require, as David mentioned, coordination with the Commons. It will require coordination with Building 9. And as part of that, the actual field itself, the skinned area as we call it, will have to also move about 10 feet. All of this work is being strategically done so that in our capital master plan, once the Building 9 construction ends, we're coming in with the bike lane. The bike lane construction in this part is pretty minimal, so it's not disruptive. But the bike lane will then connect us from one side of the promenade, Commons, the other Commons on the existing Commons, and then the other side of promenade. So we'll connect promenade to promenade using the upgrades that we'll have in the bike lane. It'll also bring in the ADA accessibility. Currently there's no wheelchair accessibility, so it'll bring that in. So a lot of those things all come together in the larger master capital plan and what we have laid out for these projects. So that's why it's important to understand that the current location of the dog run is very temporary. It's temporary for construction only. And then it will be, the field will be back to its glory, back to its usage, and it will have lights, so it'll be used again. And then it'll be upgraded, portions of it at least, for the bike lane project. So there's a lot of things happening. There's quite a big puzzle over the next 5 years within, between Building 9 and the bike lane and these other projects. There's a larger master plan that we're working towards.
So I will say that the construction license agreement is addressing a lot of these moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
So in there consists, the conformity to this diagram to the extent that we're able to maintain just the 50-foot overlay. And that was mainly because we understand that there is limited green space here on the island, and we want the residents and community and visitors alike to enjoy as much open space as possible. It also addresses the location of the dog run, the moving of the temporary crosswalk, and that's being done for safety purposes because construction will be coming out to the road, is that correct?
Yeah.
And the sidewalk. And then it also addresses, the garbage disposal new location, and, we don't have a diagram. We have an area, we can show you the area where it is, but we don't have a diagram of what it's gonna look like yet because that's one of the final pieces that we're working out. But we do agree on the location, so that's a big first step forward, I guess. And then there are other logistics in terms of like bringing materials, storing, things like that. That will be constantly monitored as we always do. Per all of our, SOPs, standard operating procedures, with regards to construction and notifying PSD and weight loads on the helix, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And one thing to also note is the control axis on, in this diagram highlighted blue has to be maintained with no access. So even during construction, no material can be stored there. So it'll still be an open grass area, just fenced in. So once the construction is completed, they'll just remove the fence, patch the areas of grass as needed, and remediate those areas, and it'll be back to field limits.
And the issue with the lighting for firefighters field, that was something that was negotiated with Building 8. And so those provisions were amended based on the fact that we were contemplating, because the field would have to be disrupted for the construction of Building 9, it would be done afterwards. So that's still very much in play in terms of obligations that Hudson has committed to. And the lighting for firefighters field will be contemplated upon substantial completion and restoration of the field itself after construction.
No, we had talked about a comfort station also.
We had, yes. We are still contemplating a comfort station. I know there was a lot of back and forth in terms of the design and what to put in the space. We, at the time, because it was in the midst of a pandemic, we had we negotiated with Hudson related companies to accept the cost of what that would be to build a comfort station, which the board unanimously approved based on the circumstances of where we found ourselves financially with the pandemic. And you know, we did make a promise that we would revisit the prospects of a comfort station at such time it was deemed appropriate, and so that's still very much on the table at some future project in the future.
Okay, and that goes into what Princess Rob is our overall master plan, looking at things strategically as opposed to just fulfilling those obligations. So there was a COVID casualty, unfortunately. We didn't need the money resources at the time, so we're revisiting that and several other projects as well.
Just one thing to note on there too, with the layout of bike lane and how the field will work in the future, we are still moving ahead in a way that if we wanted to do the comfort station project in that previous location, we still can. So we are, thinking globally on what are, things that are happening on the island, and all these puzzle pieces come together.
Good. It's a slow process to recover from the start of the pandemic. Bring services back up as much as possible in person. The project's moving forward. My attention. Great.
Any other questions?
Do you have any questions about the dog? Question? Sure.
One question for David, thank you. I'd like to know, thank you for the presentation, of course. I'd like to ask a question regarding the permanent dog run that you presented. Will that be divided for large dogs and small dogs? Because in the layout, I don't see the division.
No, I think there were a few iterations over time. I don't think we have the room to do 2 dog runs. There was a version where we did have like big dogs and small dogs. I think now we just have 1 dog run, which you looked at. We didn't. I'm a. Oh, I. Oh no, here it is. It's a pretty big size. I'm a dog. I have 2 dogs. I have a big dog and a small dog.
Good.
And I never, in terms of like how important it is, when we were trying to figure out with a little less space because of the bike lane and where everything should go, we decided to make it into one bigger run, which none of us were particularly troubled by, because you see, I think most dog parks you see in the city are not separated by size. So that was our thinking.
On this island, I have to say, as you might know already, though, there is the tendency to request a division between the sizes. Perhaps because we have been seeing an increased number of smaller dogs, and the owners fears to let them run with the large dog.
Really?
Yeah, I agree with you, actually, that I think there should be one size.
From my experience, you should be afraid of the smaller dogs.
That's right.
You're the happier ones.
That's right.
I don't know. I see. I don't know. I think it's the great democratization of dog runs. I see mostly, all size dog runs, and I hadn't really focused on it before.
Construction for this, though, is a couple of years in the future, so we have time
I mean,
to work out these issues.
It could be that the prior design was maybe listening to one or two advocates saying like we need a big
Yes.
dog run and a small dog run, but I think when we were looking at it, we sort of, that became less of a priority. But if you want to try and convince us and figure out, you know, how we would have it, or whether we take the space we have here, I don't see here. I'll have to talk to the architects, and I can follow up with you another time. Let me find out like what is the square footage of this, and does it make
pretty large.
yeah? Does it make sense to have a divider?
I'd like to just add to that. One of the things we are doing in the next few weeks is coordinating with the architect for the commons area, the landscape architect, regarding what the bike lane goes. And one of the things we have on the list is to provide them some of the comments we received from RIRA regarding the requirements of a dog run based on what our community has put together. So we will be discussing those pieces. One of the things, given that this is eventually going to be maintained by RIOC, one of the things we're also going to talk about is, you know, the RIOC standards of the pet waste station, you know, drinking bubblers, things like that. So,
Okay.
you know, because we have these things in other areas, and we want to make sure
Sure.
we make sure
So
everything.
we have enough time to work this.
Yes, we do,
Exactly.
definitely. We have enough time to work on this.
And to be honest, we're pretty agnostic on it, right? We want it to be, you know, well embraced.
So I just wanted to mention and get it out there, that there have been discussions, there will be discussions, and there's plenty of time to get to some sort of
Absolutely, I
agreement.
Yeah, piggyback on that, I'm actually proud that we're at this stage. I mean, the dog run has been quite traditional for a number of years. So the fact that we can do it on temporary space, that we have the permanent space figured out, and this is some more of a nuance that we can kind of iron out, as Howard mentioned.
Shelton, when you navigate the dog run, you can write the book on it. Getting to yes.
Thank you.
Just one up, can I, Howard, just on the temporary dog run, what efforts are gonna be made to make sure that the dogs aren't gonna be running free in the other areas of firefighters field? Cause I could see that being a problem right over there.
Well, but it is so the temporary dog run will have the same layout as the current temporary dog run, which is a small dog run and a large dog run. Both will have double gated entrance. So, you know, there's a vestibule essentially, as it's required by New York City Parks does this all the time, where, you know, if a dog is leaving the fenced area, they'll still be stopped at the vestibule before they actually go out.
So I don't think it's it's gonna be an enforcement issue.
It's a fenced area, so dogs.
I'm saying it's gonna be a public safety
Well,
enforcement
the
issue.
idea though, that you have a park area, and you're not supposed to have dogs loose in the park area.
It's no different than
Health and safety.
today.
It's a problem.
For the public, we can't
Oh,
solve
if dogs
the
are running on Fireman's Field
enforcement issue.
today?
We work out with public
That's
safety.
enforcement issue.
and,
Is it slightly, you could ask that in a different way.
No, it's gonna be more of an enforcement issue.
And the temporary dog run, just to clarify, is gonna be constructed in conformity to specifications, as you said, that parks, city parks or state parks normally has in other areas of the city and state.
What were you going to take in the past?
I'm sorry?
We were reviewing and taking in the past.
Thank you.